I must confess that I have an enduring fascination with super-fast cars. The Bugatti Chiron has 4 turbos that help this car mill 1,479 horsepower through its 8-liter quad-turbo W16 engine, producing a massive 187.5 horsepower per liter. It has an incredible 1,600 Newton meters of torque, a maximum speed of 420 kilometers an hour, an acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 2.4 seconds. Some people know what that means. I don't. If you ask me what kind of car I have, I'll tell you, it's a black one. All the fancy car doodads mean nothing to me, except for one, the most important invention since man discovered the wheel. It's the blind spot warning. I won't buy a car without it. There's nothing more important than avoiding what's ever coming at you in your blind spot. That's the mechanical equivalent of getting woke. If we are not woke, we have no idea what is in our blind spot. One false move and we're in trouble. And then it won't matter how powerful our engine is. This horrible pandemic, which to this point has killed over 200,000 of our fellow Americans, hit us in our blind spot. It has forced us to grapple with things we had not thought of previously and to learn to think in entirely different ways. Actions that previously were simple and innocuous have now become fraught with tension, even danger. You want to go hang out with your friends? You might kill your grandmother. You need to go to the grocery store? You may come back with something a lot more serious than cornflakes and a bunch of bananas. You want to send your kids to school? They might die. You want to come to shul to say Kaddish? We might end up having to say Kaddish for you. Who can live like this for an extended period of time? How can we bear the tension that now comes with everyday life? How can we keep our sanity when we can't even see smiles behind the masks? Tonight, on this most sacred of nights, I'll tell you. Tonight, on this most sacred of nights, I want us to become woke to perhaps the central component of our lives, the need for community. On Rosh Hashanah, I spoke of our need to get woke, to wake up to the realities of our Jewish condition and to the need for wisdom, knowledge, and truth. Tonight is about getting woke to community. We in America have been nurtured on the concept of rugged individualism, where a man's got to do what a man's got to do, and everybody pulls their own weight. Problem is that none of that works, and it never did. Rugged individualism was coined by Herbert Hoover, you know, the president who watched the country collapse into the Great Depression, when, if you can believe it, things were even worse than they are now. Forget Daniel Boone, John Wayne, and Rambo. What built this country, and for that matter, this congregation, and this world as a whole, is people working together. Striving toward a more perfect union involves, of necessity, promoting the general welfare. This, the wisdom of our country's founding fathers. And the Talmud captured the same idea. Whoever can prevent his household from committing a sin but does not is responsible for the sins of his household. If he can prevent the people of his city, he is responsible for the sins of his city. If the whole world, he is responsible for the sins of the whole world. With that in mind, with recognition of the massive responsibility that rests on our shoulders, I want us to think about our local and national and international responsibilities when it comes to building morally decent communities at every level. My friend and colleague, Rabbi Rich Agler, taught me something very important. When it comes to evil, as we all know, there is nothing that compares to Amalek, Yamach Shemo, the world's first terrorist who attacked the weak and the stragglers when we came out of Egypt. And we are commanded to remember what Amalek did to us and blot out his name from under the heavens. In fact, our revulsion for the confrontation with Amalek is even greater than what we feel about the experience of centuries of slavery in Egypt. And why is that? Rabbi Agler explains. Amalek, Yamach Shemo, was able to attack us because we had failed in our responsibilities and allowed there to be weak and stragglers among us. Had we taken appropriate responsibility for our community, Amalek would have been ineffective. Yes, we have to remember his evil, but we must also remember our failure. And so what we need to become woke to is the possibility in our blind spot that we are failing our community right now. I am happy to say, indeed, I am privileged to say that our immediate community, our congregation, does all sorts of wonderful things. We have adapted to this crazy pandemic with streaming and Zoom and all sorts of online resources and creative ways to reach out. And as we saw in Rosh Hashanah during the drive-in shofar service, creative ways to come together safely despite it all. But even within our congregation, a huge percentage of members are basically unconnected, perhaps even alone or isolated. We can and must do better. As the Moshav band sings, there's no place for the misplaced. There's no home for the homeless. We have to make sure there is a place by us, a home for all at Congregation B'nai Tikva. Whatever we are doing, and we are doing a lot, we have to do more. On a broader national level, we are, for the first time in a lifetime, facing a plague of biblical proportions. And there is a certain poetic biblical irony, a measure for measure, midah keneged midah in Hebrew, in the way the COVID pandemic is playing out. There is no question that the best thing we can do to stop the pandemic is to wear masks. But masks work in a peculiar way. They don't protect the wearer as much as they protect other people around the wearer. So rugged individualism, or less generously, self-centeredness, is the surest way to exacerbate the plague. The rabbis tell a beautiful story that illustrates this. A rabbi asked God to show him hell, and God complied. The rabbi saw a group of people sitting around a table. In the middle was a pot of stew, the most delicious smelling stew the rabbi had ever experienced. He looked at God and said, "This is hell?" God said, "Wait." And then the rabbi understood. When the people went to eat the stew, they had long-handled spoons, so long that they could not turn them around to bring the stew to their mouths, so they could smell it, but never taste it. The rabbi then asked, "Can you show me heaven?" And God complied. And to the rabbi's surprise, there was the same table and the same stew and the same spoons. So the rabbi looked puzzled, but God said, wait. And then the rabbi understood. The people were using the same long spoons, but they were feeding each other. The lesson is as obvious as it is important. If we care for each other, it will be heaven. If we care only for ourselves, it will be hell. For over 200,000 Americans, most of whom died because of someone else's selfishness, it was a hell not of their own making. Ours is a country that was capable of organizing D-Day. Today, we can hardly organize a daycare center. Ours is a country that could go to the moon. Today, we can't go to Canada. Ours is a country that had accumulated $100 trillion of wealth by the end of the last decade. Today, we can't find the wherewithal, political or economic, to give out-of-work Americans $600 a week. That's what happens when your sense of community breaks down. Time to get woke. And what's true on the local level and on the national level is true as well on the international level. It turns out that the distance from Wuhan to Walla Walla to Woodbridge Mall is measured in minutes, not miles. In an interconnected world, trying to separate populations to stop disease is like trying to stop mosquitoes with a chain link fence. This time, the plague is pestilence. Next time, it could be locusts or some other environmental disaster. And the time after that, it could be waves of desperate refugees driven from places that have become unlivable. Or it could be food tainted by workers too sick to work, but too poor to stop working. As Benjamin Franklin famously said, we must all hang together, for if not, we will most assuredly hang separately. If we allow there to be the weak and the stragglers, if we do not maintain and enhance a protective sense of global community, we will most assuredly pay the price for it. It is an economic price and an ethical price, but it is also an emotional and spiritual price. Our problem right now is that the difference we can make seems to constantly be a matter of life and death. We always vaguely knew that about the world. Has a year ever gone by when we weren't talking about famine in Africa, cyclones in Bangladesh, mudslides in Central America, or brush fires in Australia? And to some extent, we knew it about America too, whether talking about Tornado Alley or Skid Row, natural disasters or economic ones. But these were far enough away from us that we could ignore the fact that we contributed to them. Clear-cutting forests or raking in profits that left nature denuded and people impoverished. But that was all far away. Now, life and death decisions invade even the most mundane aspects of our life, our personal life. Every single thing we do, day after day, hour after hour, matters. We go through moral fatigue, and that drains the life out of us. But if we are woke, we understand three things. First, it has, in fact, always been thus. We just didn't acknowledge it. The great animal researcher Jane Goodall once said, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." Second, we don't have to do this alone. In fact, we can't do it alone. No individual can be an endless font of love, support, kindness, joy, respect, and fulfillment. That's what a community is for. But third, and this is very good news, we have what we need right here, a Jewish community. The classic Yiddish writer Shalom Aleichem, on a ship from Europe to New York, wrote in his diary, very few Jews on board, and for this reason, it's dispiriting. Jews are peculiar that way. If there are many, they are not easy to bear. If they are not here, you long for them. When we began struggling with the pandemic, the pain of not being able to come together as a congregation was palpable. And the joy of being able to come together, however rarely, as for our recent shofar blowing, was palpable as well. We can make each other meshuggah, 'tis true, but there's nobody I would rather be with. Now there's a deeper irony to the Shalom Aleichem story, to which we also should be woke. The name of the ship that he was on was the St. Louis, later to become infamous for the voyage of the damned, the ship bearing Jews fleeing Nazi Germany, refused entry at port after port. 254 of the passengers, innocent men, women, and children, were returned to Europe and did not survive the war. We Jews were then, please God, for the very last time, the weak and the stragglers, left to confront Amalek on our own. If we wish to avert that evil decree for us, for our country, and for all humanity, a sense of community is the key. Arise, awake from your slumber.